Okay, so I'm working a little bit backwards. I'm going to be using uh, this photo I took, and then I'm going to Street View and finding a screenshot of the same place. Um, you will be doing it the opposite way. You'll be screenshotting and then going to the actual location to photograph it. So for this, I'm just gonna try to match them up closely. You know, I can move things around here on Street View. Let's see. Let's try to get it as close as possible. Well, that looks pretty close. Make this a little bit bigger. And then to screenshot, it's Command-Shift-4, or on your keyboards, it'll look like the little Windows key, and that plus Shift, and then press 4. It gives these crosshairs on your cursor, and then select the area you want, and let go. And now you have a screenshot. It will automatically be saved on your desktop. All right, once you have your images, go to Finder. Go to your Applications folder. You can find that on the left side here. And go down to Lightroom, but click on Lightroom Classic. Not Lightroom CC, just Lightroom Classic. You'll be able to open the program through there. All right, so you should be in the Library tab. You can see the different tabs up here: Library, Develop, etc. Under Library, you can press Import, and then you should see some options on the left side. You may have to go down to, might say like student or something. Try to find where you get to desktop, and I can see the images, the files on my desktop. It's asking me to, all the little check mark boxes are checked. I don't want to import some of these earlier files. I just want to import these screenshots here, these two images. So they're both checked. They have the check marks on them. And then I come down, press Import. So it's importing those two files. I can look at them both. If I press the space bar, I can see them full size within the window in Lightroom. Once you have them imported, click on Develop, the tab up at the top. This is where we can start editing, manipulating the photograph. We have a lot of options over on the right side. If you click on down here in the bottom left where it says, looks like R and A within this rectangle, it's going to ask you, I'm actually going to switch these around first. So it's going to ask, drag and drop a photo from the film strip to see the reference photo. So I'm going to do the photo for my phone. So this is the reference view, reference and active. Active image is the one that the edits, as you change the settings here, they will be editing the active photo here on the right side, but you can see it next to the reference photo on the left side. Okay? If you want to just have one of them be the full size, then the active photo, you come back down here to the bottom left where it says the loop view, and then you can see it full size. You can zoom in, pressing Command plus or minus. Zoom in and out. I'm going to go ahead and set up with the reference view because I know these are what I'm trying to match. So first off, before we get started editing color and contrast, those kind of things, it's best to start with getting the cropping and the rotation figured out. Okay? So right now I can see this cropping that I have from my screenshot. There's a lot more extra information on the left and right, and it has a little bit too much of the ground and the grass below. So over on the left side, I have this little icon that looks like a little cropping tool with the curved arrows. So this is for cropping and rotation. I click on that. I get the cropping grid. I can start bringing these over. If I click back down here on the film strip on the original, I can say, okay, so the left side of the image does not include that second support for the entrance covering. So let's move this over. We want to get rid of that one. And on the right side, it looks like it goes right up next to this last, I'm not sure the architectural term for this, but this support, this slanted frame, kind of A-frame style, looks like the right edge touches that just barely. So let me crop this over here. And then the bottom, just under that first pillar here. Okay, so that's about the right cropping. However, the rotation, this one is leaning a little bit to the left. You can see just the way the camera was set up and the way the image was being taken from the Google car. The whole kind of pyramid shape looks like it's leaning a little bit to the left. So let's try to decide angle. We have this little slider here. We can start rotating it. I'm going to rotate it over a bit. Try to line that up. That might have been a little bit too much. Let's try this, and then when I'm done, press done here. All right, that's probably about as close as I'm going to get with these options. I actually might rotate it just a little bit more. After rotating it, kind of messed up my crop a little bit, so I'm going to extend it a little bit more to the left side. All right, so obviously these are not exact. This is the benefit of you going out to the actual place. You have more control because you'll be trying to replicate the Street View image. With this one, I was just replicating the phone photo with the Street View image, and I have a lot less control over the composition of the whole image. Okay, but we're going to say that this is good enough for now. Also, notice how for the screenshot, there's a lot less sky, a lot less headroom above the top of this pyramid steeple shape. Well, I can't add any more room for the screenshot, so instead I have to edit the original. So, oops. So I'll click on the original and I'll crop this one down some. Press done. Okay. you probably will have to go back and forth between editing both images. Now we are going to focus on one, but there will be some limitations to how much we can edit this one photograph. We might have to then do some edits to this one to get them to match up. Is everybody in Lightroom? Any problems getting in Lightroom? Okay. All right, once you have the cropping and rotation in a good place, we can start going through all the different tools on the right-hand side. So starting out, some basic stuff, exposure, contrast, some of the editing the highlights and shadows, color as well. Overall, the reference photo is a little more kind of bluish, a little more purplish too. Let me just go ahead and start bringing that over just a bit. We can come back and change that a little bit later. Exposure is the overall lightness and darkness, so we're going to bring this one down, start getting that a little bit closer. Contrast is basically the gap between the highs and lows. So if you notice in the histogram up here, this will change. This is the graph that basically shows the different values of color and tones within the image. So if I raise or lower the contrast, notice how the histogram is changing. Okay, so when I lower the contrast, it's taking down the extreme highs and lows, highlights, shadows, bringing them more towards the center, so everything's a little more gray, muted, matte, versus when I take the contrast all the way to the right, now it starts getting more extreme with stronger shadows and highlights. And so there's a greater discrepancy between the values on either end, okay? So let's get this for right now. I'll have it about right here. When I hover over highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, notice in the histogram, the region that corresponds with the highlights or shadows is highlighted up here, and I can hover over here as well. So for highlights, it's going to be a lot of like the sky, so I can darken the sky without it darkening the shadows on the building, because it's just affecting the highlighted areas. So let's bring this down. Shadows, I might bump up the shadows a bit. Okay. Next is presence. We have texture, clarity, and dehaze. Texture is just basically amplifying the texture that's in the photograph. So if I increase it, you really see the stone exterior, which is a kind of a texture on the building, really starts to pop more. But also, the clouds start looking a little sharper. It might be a little overwhelming. Clarity does something similar, but you could decrease the clarity. It starts having more like kind of like a dreamy, very soft, dreamy effect. Or high clarity is a more kind of like stark, high contrast, almost like a rough film look that we're starting to go towards. Dehaze, if you have a kind of really hazy, cloudy day, you can increase the contrast. Basically, it's just an effect to make it a little more clear. Then below this, we have some color effects, vibrance, and saturation. they both affect how much the color is being seen, how strongly the colors are saturated. You could have low vibrance, high saturation, low saturation, high vibrance. Let me try to find something. All right, next, under those options, we have tone curve. Honestly, you guys probably won't need to be using this a whole lot. It can adjust specific areas that correspond with the histogram here. That you can see it as kind of just a squash version of the histogram above. But you can specifically edit either red, green, or blue values or total. So if I click on the red values, over here, the top right is the highlights. If I click and drag this over, it's really changing the red value in those highlighted areas. A lot of people will use an S curve for different effects, so we get a little more contrast. So as we bump up, increase the red values and the highlights and decrease it in the shadows, we get kind of a more colorful effect where the sky becomes kind of reddish, the building becomes greenish. We're not really doing anything like that for this class, obviously, because you're just trying to match these photographs together. But it's good to know that it's there and how to use it. I'll just leave a very, very subtle change there. Bring out some red in some of these shadows. Next, what you might be using a lot more is the HSL/color tab. HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. So you'll see all these sliders here that correspond with a color range, red, orange, yellow, all the way to magenta. So I can choose, I'll click on hue. One of the strongest colors in this photograph is the blue sky. So if I come down to the blue color range and I'm selected on hue, if I slide this around, it will start changing the hue of that blue area. So I can, in this case, I'm really changing the color of the sky, especially. So my reference photo is kind of purplish, honestly, so let me make a little more purple. It's a little bit too saturated, so now next I'll come to the saturation, and the same thing for blue. I'll bring the saturation down a bit, trying to match the kind of purples that are happening on this side. And luminance is the lightness and darkness. So on that same blue area, you can make it darker or lighter. So we'll bring it around right there. Okay, next down is color grading. This one, again, probably won't be using a whole lot, but you can see where it says shadows, midtones, highlights. Let's say I want to start editing some of the shadows. I can click in the little color wheels, and then as I move it around, it's really affecting the shadows on that building. You can start getting just too much happening too quickly, so please only use this very, very subtly. Next is detail. We can control the sharpness and noise reduction. So for sharpness, you may want to zoom in. And this is a little bit pixelated because it's just a screenshot. But if I increase the sharpening, you'll see how it starts bringing out some of the detail in the bricks and the lines of the architecture. Noise reduction basically goes the other way. I usually like to have a little bit of sharpening and noise reduction, so I'm making it a little bit sharper, but then some of this noise, like some of this like pixelation and other stuff, we can get rid of it, kind of smooth it out a little bit. If I go extreme, you can see how the difference, how much smoother that makes it. But it might start looking a little unnatural, so we'll just have a little bit of noise reduction. Lens correction is probably, you probably won't be using. That's mostly for DSLR cameras that have like specific lenses that will, like some lenses, like for example, really wide angle lenses that kind of distorting the image a little bit because it's trying to capture as much of the area as possible. Like for example, taking that to extreme, like fisheye lenses, the distortion that happens where it really bends the image. You might get that effect a little bit if you have like a wide angle lens. That you can start changing that, getting rid of that distortion here. So you can see if I change that, it kind of bends it inwards or outwards. We probably won't be doing anything like that because I'm assuming most of you guys will probably be taking photos with your phones. If you do take it with a DSLR camera that has some sort of special lens on it, this is where you might edit that a bit. Let me just get this in a good place. Okay. Transform is a little more intense. If you have found that you have brought your photograph into Lightroom and you just realize, wow, I did not match this up well. You can start manipulating some of the image this way, so especially through vertical and horizontal transform. It can start stretching it in certain ways that maybe will kind of put it in the right angle horizontally, But hopefully you won't have to do this. This is only kind of an emergency situation to get really a match up. Next up is effects. So we have vignetting. So if I put a vignette on here, and we'll take down the feather so I can see the shape of the vignette. I can change the midpoint. Let's have it more on the corners, and I can put the feather back up so it's a little softer, and then just a slight, actually let's do a little more circular. Now if I do this, I'm going to want to also do the same thing over on this image. This can be a good way to start blending them together. So if you have a vignette on one that's kind of darkening, blending the corners, the edges, then you can do the same thing on the other photograph, and then they'll start having the same look with that same effect. So let me click on this one. I'll do the same thing here. Okay, and the last option is calibration. This is just going to be a little more of editing, very subtly editing the colors in certain areas like the shadows. It's not doing a whole lot, it's just for that kind of final tweaking. Okay? So now I've gotten, also I just realized I need to crop the bottom of this a little more. Okay, so now they're starting to get closer. Now, there's a couple big things that are still very different between these two images. Who who can spot something really, really obviously different? Yeah.
Like the tint of the picture, the one on the left, it has more of like a greenish bluish tint on the building,
Mm-hmm.
while the other one has more like a pink and or magenta tint on it.
Exactly. Yes. And part of that is because of the time of day that these were taken. Notice this one here, it has a highlight, and this side, these white areas are really reflecting the sunlight. And we kind of get a hint, it looks like the sun. We see the edges of the clouds here, the light's coming from the side. So we have highlights illuminating this side of the building. This one, not so much. It looks like the sun is coming from maybe behind it or a little bit on this side. This area is not being illuminated, it's in shadow. Great example of why you would want to get the same look, make it easier on yourself. Go take your photo at the same time of day. Now, if you, for whatever reason, are not able to do that, or let's just say you get back into class on Monday and you realize maybe you forgot something, maybe there's something really different, we can start editing and kind of making it look like there are highlights on this side. So we're going to do that through adding masks. All right. On back over here on the top right, this circle, if I hover over it, it says masking. Let me click on that. And then you have different options for the different types of masks that you can make. You will mostly be using brush, linear gradient, and radial gradients. You can, there's like a select sky mask that it will try to recognize which parts are the sky like automatically. That might come in handy. But we're gonna start with the brush. So I'm gonna click on brush. It opens this little window here that shows me all the masks that I'm using. And so when I click to make a new mask, now my cursor changes. I have this little circle with the plus sign in the middle. And I can change the size of it over here on the right. I know it's hard to see, but if I'm increasing, let me see if I can. So I know it's hard to see, but as I'm increasing the size of the brush tool, it'll make it larger or smaller. I'm going to keep it pretty small. It's also, feather is how soft the edges are, and flow and density is how much of the effect is being applied. All right, so let me zoom in. And if I hold down the space bar, I'll get a little hand tool. I can click, I can drag this around. So I just want to zoomed in just on this side of the building. So I'm gonna start clicking and drawing over the red area that is just showing the area that I'm drawing on. So I'm gonna draw over this whole side of this building. I'm just gonna go through this quickly. I would take more time, be more careful with it for you guys, but I'm gonna go through this quickly. Then I can, once I got the main area covered, I'll make the size smaller, come in here, do some details on the edges. Okay. Now when I'm done, I've just drawn over the whole area that I want to start applying the mask effects on. So now I have this whole new window of the same photo effects. So if I come to exposure, See, now is affecting just this one area. Let me make it the whole thing a little bit brighter. But it's really going to be in the contrast and the highlights. I want to boost these highlights. And I want to decrease the shadows some. As you mentioned, the color is still a little bit off. There's a greenish tint on this side. So up here, where I can choose temperature and tint, I know I want to get a little bit cooler temperature, so I'm going to go a little more blue, just a little bit, and then add some more green in there. Not too much. Maybe a little bit more blue. Not too much. Bump up the clarity some. Make it a little bit sharper. I think we could even use just a little bit more green. And then on my my masks window here, I can turn it off and on. So look at the difference already that mask has made. Okay, so I went through that really quickly, but this is the natural photo with the that side being in the shadow, but I've kind of cheated it. Now it looks like it has a highlight. Okay. I can add other masks as well. So because of the screenshotting from Street View, part of there's like this overlay on Google, you know, you don't have to worry about this kind of stuff, but I'm going to use it as an example. So you see this kind of dark layer above here. I could take this out a little bit. Actually, yeah, I'll go ahead and try to get rid of it just a touch. So I can come up to create new mask. This time I'm going to use linear gradient. So now with linear gradient, I can click outside the edge of the image, click and drag down. So it's going from top to bottom. I can rotate it. I can also, after I let go, I can move this around. I can stretch it depending on how much of the area I want to affect. I'm going to just try to bring down some of the darkness of this kind of top stripe. So we're just going to lighten it just a touch. All right, but it's still there. So now, this is a time where I want to come over and edit the phone photograph. So I'll come click on this one. I'll do the same thing. I add a mask, linear gradient. This time, instead of lightening it, I want to darken this area to get it to match a little more. Okay, so again, this effect came from the Google Street View. That's why it's kind of like an unnaturally solid shape up there. But that's good enough for now. Finally, there is the make a new mask. I'm going to do the radial gradient mask. This one works a lot like the linear, except instead of it going from one side progressively over to the opposite side, it functions as an ellipse. So I can click and drag and make this the shape here. I don't think there is a spot in this photograph that I would naturally use the ellipse. Like this comes more in handy for portrait photographs, things like that, things that like faces. But just as an example, I'll just kind of fit it over. Maybe we'll do this part of the sky over here. This, you know, we have this really bright highlight, so I'm gonna bring this one over here, increase the highlights. Okay. So if I turn off all the masks again, let me zoom out. This is the way it was. And then just with those masks, just those three, we immediately start getting a lot closer. I would also do another mask for the front of this building, because even though this is in shadow, just like this one, the color is off. The sky on this side, for the original photo, it has a little bit of a greenish tint. I might add a little more green over here. I'm going to do all of that with masks. Okay? Any questions? All right, so these are the fundamentals for Lightroom. Again, try as best you can to think about time of day, to think about time of year. If it's, you know, if you guys find a really great image, but there's tons of trees that have no leaves, I hate to say it, but it's just, you're not gonna be able to use that image. It's just not gonna work, okay? Because right now we're still at the end of summer, all the trees have leaves on them. It's just not gonna match up, all right?